Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Road to Disclosure. As I begin this episode, I want to kind of drive home the point that the United States and the world is controlled by an overarching structure that's defined by an elite group, a hierarchy of elites who've kind of maintain power and control via a lot of the resources, largely the monetary system, but over the course of at least the last 100 years in the United States, if not longer. But obviously, in the world, it's been going on since the fall of Rome, or since the origins of Rome. But I really want to reemphasize the point that the ruling class right now that exists, and is notable as being referenced as, the cabal, the Illuminati. Some people call them, David Icke calls it the invisible hand. It's also called the secret earth syndicates in truth-seeking circles. But just the origins in the United States stem from kind of the banking clans. And one of the articles I referenced last episode was one from globalresearch.ca, and this gives a really good history, which I'm not exactly sure where the author obtained some of the research, the information, but a lot of it was reminiscent of my research when I would read Jim Marrs, his books. Ruled by Secrecy is one of the books he has that's really good. But just to showcase, it actually emphasizes a lot of the interlocking mechanisms that play a part in controlling of the monetary system. So just to kind of go back to it, the article itself, you can see this one here, the Federal Reserve Cartel, the 8 families. It's much larger than 8 families, but obviously you have a grouping of 8 families that are at the top echelon of power. And this acknowledges some of the banks that are involved, as well as the oil cartels, which you can see at least in the beginning of this, including Bank of America, JP Morgan Chase, Citigroup, Wells Fargo, and then the oil cartels, ExxonMobil, Shell, BP, and Chevron. But part of this article acknowledges the control of these banking families exert over the global economy cannot be overstated and is quite intentionally shrouded in secrecy. It wasn't until recently that a lot of this was becoming more prominent, largely in part due to the alternative media gaining such prominent ground, whereas a lot of people nowadays don't even trust corporate media. I think the last poll that I read, it was, at least for the millennial generation, it was like 6% trusted the corporate media, mainstream, which is pretty significant. But so the corporate media arm is quick to discredit any information espousing this private central banking cartel as conspiracy theorists. It's a derogatory term. Conspiracy theorist was actually coined by the CIA after the Kennedy assassination, if you didn't already know that. To discredit those that questioned the government's explanation. So this article actually will go in and goes in to describe some of the major families. At this point, it's talking about the House of Morgan, JP Morgan, when he died and when the Rockefeller Foundation was formed. House of Morgan catered to the Astors, DuPonts, Guggenheims, Vanderbilts, and Rockefellers that financed the launch of AT&T, General Motors, General Electric, and DuPont. Like the London-based Rothschild and Barings banks, Morgan became part of the power structure in many countries. So it goes on to explain a lot of the history. You guys can actually look this up, on your own time. And then some of the article, it's actually a 4-part series. But it just outlines kind of the history and, again, the interlocking relationships that's defined by these 8 families. And it's pretty extensive. This is good stuff. Goes into the House of Rockefeller, explaining the BIS is the Bank for International Settlements, which is the most powerful bank in the world. That actually is where most other banks will go to gain more, if they're having trouble paying off their own debts, they'll go to the Bank for International Settlements. It's a global central bank, purportedly for these 8 families who control the private central banks of all the Western countries and developing nations. Let's see, some of the other more relevant, BIS, Bank for International Settlements, is owned by the Federal Reserve, Bank of England, Bank of Italy, Bank of Canada, Swiss National Bank, Netherlands Bank, Bundesbank, which is Deutsche Bank, and Bank of France. There's a whole slew of stuff in here that's really, really good. So if you guys have a chance, I would definitely recommend reading it. Bank of International Settlements holds at least 10% of monetary reserves for at least 80 of the world's central banks. The IMF, another multilateral institution that serves as financial agent for international agreements, collects information on the global economy, and serves as lender of last resort to prevent global financial collapse. I believe the Bank for International Settlements was actually instituted in 1930, and then you had the Bretton Woods Agreement, which instituted the World Bank, International Monetary Fund, the IMF, which was significant. You can actually see down here, Bretton Woods was a boon to the 8 families. The IMF and World Bank were central to this New World Order. In 1944, the first World Bank bonds were floated by Morgan Stanley and First Boston. The French Lazard family, which is one of the prominent families, became more involved in House of Morgan interests. So yeah, this has a lot of really good, relevant information if you're actually interested in kind of the machinations around controlling the financial system at large. The institution, the Federal Reserve in 1913, you had a group of prominent figures go to Jekyll Island off the coast of Alabama. I can't remember exactly which state it's off the coast of. But they obviously determined what was the best method to control the financial system. I'm gonna actually go back to the video with Chuck Coppice on Gaia, and just he provides some more insight, which is very similar to what I just explained, but give you a little different insight rather than my own perspective. So I'll just show this for a little bit. This actually plays this time.
Central banking is very corrupt. I mean, it was born in secrecy in Jekyll Island in 1910.
By private banking companies, right? Cartels, basically.
Well, it became a cartel because Paul Warburg was there. His brother ran the central bank in Germany, and Nelson Aldrich headed up this committee in 1908 after the bank panic of 1907. And some of that was contrived on Wall Street because of the market speculation, the copper. There was some copper speculation. But noting the weakness, bankers always wanted a lender of last resort. They wanted an elastic economy, as they put it, and they wanted to put the losses on the taxpayer. Just what you said.
Of course.
Yeah, just what you said. So it would never square with our U.S. Constitution, central bank. We should have Article 1, Section 8 and 10. We should have only gold and silver as legal tender, every state, colonies. And so now we have paper money. So they had to run around that. In fact, the Federal Reserve would never pass the supremacy test today in the High Court because it wouldn't square with our Constitution.
Are all countries in this kind of shape, financial shape?
Yeah, very much. I mean, Japan has been pursuing QE for 25 years, the European Central Bank, and central banking began in 1694, the Bank of England, and so that's been replicated everywhere. And our founding fathers knew this. In 1775, Benjamin Franklin said that the primary cause for the revolution was to get control of our own currency. And away from that debt. They'd run up their own debt being a British empire. Does this sound familiar? Trying to be a global policeman and empire. The cost of empire is taking us down.
Absolutely.
That's the risk that we're running. So central banking was created in 1913 with the Federal Reserve Act. Congressmen really don't understand banking. They were just passing it 3 days before Christmas on a near-empty congressional floor. And they passed the Federal Reserve Act.
These people, Chuck, aren't stupid.
No, they're not stupid. But this is pertinent information to kind of understand what's transpiring. I always think the best question to answer is always the why these things happen. It's probably the hardest question to answer because you have to get inside these people's heads, and it's not always just about greed, avarice. It's more to it than that, and I really can't explain this fully until I give more insight into my own understanding of why this occurs, which will be told about in subsequent episodes. But these things are planned out. They're very patient in terms of their planning. So in terms of central banking, that was something that was thought up years in advance, decades, if not hundreds of years in advance. And they've kind of replicated this from past civilizations, whether it was Rome, ancient Babylon, ancient Sumeria. A lot of the history kind of delves into this, which I'm not going to go into right now, but everybody can kind of go do their own research and figure this out. The monetary system at large and throughout the world is typically, in the truth-seeking community, is typically called money magic Babylonian system. I think that's what it's called. It's something akin to that. You can look it up. Anyway, the efforts actually being made for me to actually explain all of this is in conjunction with explaining how politicians are part and parcel of this process of controlling the monetary system and how that affects world governance. So right now with the election going on, it's actually Monday morning, and so the election is going to happen in the United States, is going to happen a day from now. So I really wanted to actually spend an episode explaining some of this to a large degree on how I feel politicians are used in this battle of supremacy between factions. So it's not so much that we, the people, have a say. I mean, we do vote, and that can count for something. My opinion, though, you're just consenting to the illegitimate governance and corruption that goes hand in hand with all of this. So I'm actually not. I'm not a person who would validate that and want to vote because all I see it as being just legitimizing the current structure that's in place, whereas I want it to change completely. But everyone's entitled to their own opinion and their own understanding of what's transpiring. So if you think your vote matters, by all means vote. I am going to try and provide some insight as to why your vote doesn't matter. And you can believe me or not. So kind of to round out maybe this episode, I do want to show an interview that was done on Abby Martin's show, Breaking the Set from RT. Had a whistleblower named Annie Michonne kind of discussing, she was out of MI5, I believe, and acknowledging, at least out of Great Britain, the manipulation that goes on to coerce and manipulate politicians even before the election process, so they become pawns, they become agents of different cabal groups, so that they work for them rather than try and work for the people that they're meant to, that they're voted in office to work for. So just want to kind of go into this real quick. It's like a 2-minute video, and I'll end the episode on that. So here you go.
Here in the U.S., a lot of people have speculated, I guess, through revelations from Bill Benny, other whistleblowers, that the NSA holds disproportionate kind of influence on the rest of the bodies of government here. Would you say GCHQ works in the same way?
Absolutely. Well, we have 3 key intelligence agencies: GCHQ, which is like the NSA, MI6, which is like the CIA, and MI5, which actually is not the FBI. It's more like the Stasi from East Germany, because we have a national crime agency, which is the FBI. So it's a bit of a hangover from history. But all three of those agencies, and particularly MI5, has had an inordinate degree of leverage over our political classes for decades. And the reason I say that is because they used to gather files on people who then became politicians. So if there was a general election, they would check everyone who was standing for election in that year. If they had a file, that file would be pulled out and it would be reviewed, and a report would be written to the head of that parliamentary party. So, for example, if a party wins, and that person might be put in government and they might be deemed to be a national security risk, then they will be blocked from that appointment. So all these MPs are aware that they might have files on them. All of them are aware they're not allowed to see those files, and all of them are very aware that if they step out of line and don't give the spies the powers and the resources that they demand, then nasty little stories could appear in the British media about them. And most MPs, most of our elected representatives have some little guilty secrets floating around somewhere, be it, expenses fiddling or kiddie fiddling or, mistresses or lovers or whatever. So they're very wary of taking on the intelligence agencies.
In a recent interview you gave, you said that although we're living in a very complex world, there are some simple steps we can take. Sorry.
All right, so I'm
Governments and
gonna
citizens to protect.
stop it right there. I do want to end the episode with this one article from WakingTimes.com, who pretty much agrees with my my mindset, that showing up on election day, knowing full well the candidates we've been presented with do not represent our ambitions for this nation. We are tacitly expressing our willingness to being governed in this manner, contributing to the perception that our rulers have our permission to carry on. And by doing such, we are acquiescing even further to their dominion over us. This is exactly my viewpoint. We are giving consent, tacitly giving them, implied or not, by voting more people in to a corrupt government. It's allowing them to maintain this structure. So this acknowledges, if you're one of the few Americans who hasn't already committed yourself heart and soul to one of the two majorly phony political parties dominating the U.S. and are still trying to decide which taste of bitters you go for on election day, consider this: there is no constitutional requirement that you vote. There's not a law in the United States that obliges you to consent to the corruption, lies, criminality, warmongering, fear, hate, stupidity, tyranny, surveillance, and self-destruction being championed by today's candidates. You are still free to opt out and explore the moral high road of conscientious objection should your value system be so utterly insulted by the fake election process taking place before us. This really good quote here: the American people are being guilted, bullied, pressured, cajoled, intimidated, terrorized, and browbeaten into voting. We're constantly told to vote because it's your so-called civic duty, because you have no right to complain about the government unless you vote, because every vote counts, because we must present a unified front, because the future of the nation depends on it, because God compels us to do so, because by not voting you're in fact voting, because the other candidate must be defeated at all costs, or because the future of the Supreme Court rests in the balance. You are under no moral obligation to vote for the lesser of two evils. Indeed, voting for a lesser evil is still voting for evil. So I completely agree with this quote. In fact, some of the studies that have been done on the effects of not voting, if it's done in the majority, countries like Cuba during the revolution with under Batista, where you had Fidel Castro, the majority of the country did not vote, sent a message to the leadership. Same thing happened in the early 90s, I believe, in Haiti. I can't remember the current politicians there. But then you have the major conflict in the apartheid in South Africa, where the majority of people did not vote. And that sent a message to the government saying they were not welcome. And so that leadership left. And the people pretty much acknowledged they were the ones who had the authority and the power. Same thing goes in Iceland. Iceland is a huge microcosm of what can transpire on a global basis to kick the bankers out of the country, and that's precisely what they did only a few years ago after the 2008 recession. So just acknowledging that your voice, if you have the conviction and understanding that you don't have to vote for the people that are the mainstream media is promoting, and the government is promoting via a two-party system, which is really not a two-party system. You do not have to vote. You can stand with your own convictions and your conscience, and stick to your moral values and obligations. So I just wanted again to get that out there. The next episode I'll go more into kind of how these banking cartels utilize the monetary system and how much debt they've accrued and how they're trying to erase that debt, rather than just have us pay it off. So I guess I want to thank everybody for watching. Yeah, if you have any suggestions, insights, please comment on the videos below the video. So see you next time. Thanks.